Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you so much for joining us. So tonight we're going to be diving into something a little different. Who built the Egyptian pyramids? Seems like a simple question, right? Well, maybe not. For years, historians have told us the Egyptians crafted these wonders around 4,500 years ago. But tonight we're asking the question they're afraid to answer. What if that's completely wrong? Our guest, Project Unity founder and host Jay Anderson, doesn't buy the official story. He believes an advanced ancient civilization, one older than Egypt itself, built the pyramids. And here's what's wild. He says powerful interests are deliberately hiding this truth from us. So why would the government and academia stick to a story filled with holes? Could it be they're protecting something bigger, something they don't want you to know? Well, tonight, Jay lays out shocking evidence. Why are there no hieroglyphs or mummies found inside pyramids supposedly built as tombs? Why does the Sphinx show signs of water erosion that could date back tens of thousands of years, completely rewriting history? And how did ancient builders align the pyramids perfectly with stars in the sky? Alignments requiring advanced knowledge. Even stranger, authorities actively suppress and erase discoveries contradicting their narrative. But why? From secret societies and lost civilizations to extraterrestrials and ancient technologies hidden in plain sight, this conversation will blow your mind, challenge everything you think you know, and expose a truth some people desperately want buried. That's all coming up here tonight on The Kim Iverson Show. Jay, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Kim. Thanks for having me.
I love this topic. We don't really dive into stuff like this on the show very often, but sometimes we do. We'll get into UFOs. We'll get into kind of some ancient mysteries. And pyramids, one of the greatest mysteries, still yet to be totally and completely figured out. However, mainstream history teaches that the Egyptians built the pyramids 4,500 years ago. Why do you think that explanation does not hold up?
Well, for quite a few years, I've been looking at various different areas of archaeology, archaeoastronomy, even quantum physics and acoustics and mythology and consciousness studies, and exploring the possibility that a highly advanced civilization once existed on Earth long before the historical records that we currently trust as essentially gospel. A civilization predating what we call the Younger Dryas period, which was essentially a time of global cataclysm around 12,800 years ago. And Egypt in general is one of these places where even in the dynastic period, which is the kind of pharaonic period where the pharaohs reigned, the time we're taught about in school, even that's fascinating. You know, they were an incredible civilization and a series of dynasties. But what you find in Egypt is completely contradictory archaeology and sophistication that doesn't match up with the rest of the dynastic period temples and sacred sites that are all over the country. So the pyramids, especially, and the Great Pyramid of Giza and the plateau itself, is an example of such incredible sophistication, such incredible science being applied to it, that our models for history, the way that we attribute it to the ancient Egyptians, doesn't match up with what we discover just in general about the pyramids, to say nothing of what's recently been claimed by a group of Italian scientists who have made some very shocking discoveries under the Giza Plateau, which we can get into, I'm sure we will be getting into quite deeply.
Well, I'm just curious why the mainstream, what do they call themselves? Egyptologists or something like that? Is that actually a term that the scientists
Egyptologists?
Egyptologists,
yeah. Yeah, Egyptologists.
Okay. So these Egyptologists, they from what I understand, they balk at any idea that the pyramids weren't built by the Egyptians. I think, of course, they were built 4,500 years ago by the Egyptians, yet it's still known as a great mystery. So how could it possibly be a great mystery, and yet they assert no. Anything other than the mainstream narrative of 4,500 years ago is just, it's just quackery. This is just conspiracy theory or whatnot. Why are they holding on to that so heavily?
Well, a lot of it, I think, comes down to something that we see echoed through history, whether you're looking at theology or you're looking at history and archaeology or science, is that you get a status quo, an entrenched status quo, a dogma, a model, a way of explaining things, and the majority will adhere to that model. It's got enough satisfactory ticks on the box. It kind of rounds the edges enough, and we can be satisfied with that. So a lot of the time, think of people like Galileo, who were jailed and thrown away for their incredibly ostentatious claims about the earth. And this has happened throughout time. We've burned heretics for going against what we believe to be the way that the world works, and it's no different now. And I think that a lot of it does come down to this kind of dogmatism. I mean, if mainstream history is so complete, why are we still uncovering massive sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey that push back the timeline of civilization by thousands of years? We were told for over a century that nothing advanced existed before 3000 BC. Now we're finding complex megalithic temples in Turkey. They date back to 9600 BC. So again, with the Egyptologists, I think there's a very entrenched status quo in relationship to the region and the culture, and attributing it to the dynastic Egyptians. But the dynastic Egyptians did not write about the pyramids. They did not create iconography of the pyramids. And one of the things that's very noticeable, and I've traveled through Egypt, I've been to many of these different places. One of the things that's very noticeable, if you go to the Valley of the Kings or the Valley of the Queens, where many of these pharaohs were buried and many of these, regal royal members of the Egyptian dynasties were buried, the tombs are absolutely adorned in hieroglyphs and motifs and gold and calligraphy, and it's beautiful and awe-inspiring. You go into the pyramids, where we were told that these are tombs for the pharaohs, and there's not a single inscription, there's no hieroglyphics, there's absolutely nothing that would indicate the hallmarks, the absolute hallmarks of dynastic Egyptian time periods, where they were being extremely artful. And there's not a square inch of space on some of these temples where the hieroglyphs take up everything, yet the pyramids lay bare. And one of the other things that is very important for people to realize, because we get taught this in school, that the pyramids are tombs for the pharaohs. Not one single mummy has ever, I repeat, ever been recovered from inside any, I repeat, any pyramids in Egypt. And the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Khafra Pyramid, the three on the Giza Plateau are no exception. There has never been any recovery of mummies. So, they stand so firm on these ideas, and they kind of hold themselves up on a high horse of academia and, credulity. But at the same time, they're actually offering no evidence for what they claim to be historical fact. And then when you counter that with alternative theories about what the pyramids might be, there is far more evidence for technological, functional properties.
Seems like that would be the first indication that they're not tombs, is the fact that you haven't found any bodies. Right? That would be the first
hint, guys.
Yeah, right. Like, how do you claim this when there's no bodies? And then,
the reason why the Pyramid of Khafra, the reason why the Pyramid of Khafra was or Khufu, the Great Pyramid, was attributed to Khufu, was because Zahi Hawass, who was the former Minister of Antiquities for Egypt, found like a chicken scratch little symbol attributed to Khufu on one of the stones. And there is no other iconography. It's clearly a piece of graffiti, something that was put on there, many, many years ago, obviously, perhaps in Khufu's reign, but it's certainly not evidence enough to attribute the entirety of the design and building to the, Pharaoh Khufu. It's completely absurd that they use these data points as the kind of evidence to create these narratives, when there's so much alternative evidence for much more interesting theories. And I don't know, perhaps it's a little bit too disruptive for people to know.
Yeah, maybe. So you're saying that there's an Egyptian teenager went into the pyramid and it was like, oh, here's like a picture of the great ruler, the pharaoh, and
maybe, but there's a lot, like Ramesses III was known for just slapping his slogans on everything and anything. These guys kind of just put their stuff on whatever they wanted and attribute it to them. So it's very difficult to say with absolute certainty that, especially when it's just one little scribbly symbol on the pyramid, that attributes it to Khufu. It's pretty weak evidence.
Yeah, and the fact that there aren't any ornate hieroglyphics, like you mentioned, any ornate, just like anything beautiful inside of the pyramids would seem to indicate that these are not tombs for the pharaohs.
No, they're not. And just the end. Sorry.
I'm just wondering, how do they? What do they say? What do the mainstream Egyptologists? What do they say about the lack of any of this? I mean, how do they explain that away? Do they say, well, the pharaohs wanted their pyramids to be without all the decor because culturally there was something? Like, what is their excuse?
Yeah, like pretty much. It's pretty much weak source excuses. Like, this was just a different type of spiritual veneration that required no symbology to be put upon it, and there was like different various reasons are given, that there was just a period of time in the Egyptian dynasties where they were no longer using hieroglyphs. They use that to explain things like the Osirian as well, which doesn't have any hieroglyphs on it. There's a few different sites that are much older and seem to be far more sophisticated in the stone building processes that are completely void of hieroglyphs, and the pyramids are one of those. And I would say that it's just not good enough to say that this was just a period of time where they were deciding not to use hieroglyphs, or that there was a different type of symbology represented just in the pyramid itself, and that was enough. These people clearly, again, it was a hallmark of Egyptian civilization to use these hieroglyphics, to use these motifs and these symbols all over their temples. So it doesn't make sense, and I think it does speak towards a different civilization. And the Sphinx is another area on the Giza plateau which lends a lot of credibility to the proposition that this is a far older site. The weathering around the enclosure of the Sphinx, which was originally discovered by Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schoch. It clearly shows that there was water erosion, heavy water erosion around the enclosure of the Sphinx. And we know through science, through modern science, through our abilities to map and date and look at the ground and analyze it. This isn't my field, but there are people who are absolutely able to understand this, that there is clear evidence that the heavy waterfall that would have been required to create the erosion around the Sphinx wouldn't have been around for tens of thousands of years. It could potentially bring the Sphinx back to 30,000 years old.
Wow.
It's extremely controversial. And one of the most interesting things is that there is a massive vein going through part of the enclosure of the Sphinx, where you can actually stand inside of it, just to give a kind of an idea of the scope of it. And I think it was Dr. Robert Schoch who was standing inside this large vein going through the plateau, where you can see it was water erosion, very clearly water erosion. And the Egyptian government, believe it or not, there are photos of this, the Egyptian government cemented it over with bricks. They covered it up. They literally cemented that area up so that you can't stand it anymore. Removed evidence, eventually, deleted evidence.
Why would they do that?
Why would they do that, Kim? It's almost like they have a vested interest in upholding a narrative for some reason, and who knows what that reason might be, but it goes very deep. And, you have to consider why the Egyptian pyramid is on your dollar bill.
Why do you think it is?
Well, it goes back to Freemasons and the secret societies, the old Hermetic wisdoms. Hermeticism was the ancient theologies of ancient Egypt, and these were brought into the secret societies of Freemasonry. And, people laugh at those groups because on the outside, it's a lot of kind of men LARPing in robes, and that's essentially what it is. On the outer perimeters, it's more of a club for people to hang out in and learn some interesting esoteric knowledge. But you'd be a fool to believe that the upper echelons of things like Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians and these elements of esoteric mystery school knowledge keepers are anything other than influential and quite powerful. I mean, they essentially founded America. Washington, D.C. is littered with Freemason symbology. So, having it on the dollar bill is another symbol just to say that there is an extreme power and extreme veneration given to the pyramids that isn't translated into the school books, right? It's printed on everything. It's clearly powerful, and it's used in so much esoteric symbology, but we're told it's something very simple and explainable, yet it remains very much unexplained in how it was even created. So, there is a lot of mystery involved, and I think a lot of powerful symbology that's used in the modern era that people just kind of brush off until you really examine what it could imply.
Do you think that there are people that are the keepers of knowledge that the rest of us don't have inside of these secret societies?
Yes, I think there are absolutely people who hold on to ancient knowledge that's been kept through oral tradition is extremely powerful. All you have to do is go to the Native Americans and ask them about that. They still have an extremely strong oral tradition that stretches back thousands of years, passed down from shaman to shaman, chieftain to chieftain, tribe to tribe. And it's no different in the esoteric orders. The reason for that, and the symbology, because the reason for this is they were hunted down as heretics when they were going against the status quo of the era, when it was the Crusades and the Vatican Church, and people were being burned alive for not having the correct perspective on God. So this is where these secret societies were even formed. It was formed out of a necessity of maintaining what they believed to be very important information from the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, these ancient teachings that were then discarded discarded and considered heretical to monotheistic religions like Christianity and, the Abrahamic religions. This is what forced these people into these kind of underground networks, and that's what formed into Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism and all these different societies. But the symbolism is used as a way of encoding the knowledge that they've been keeping. So when you have the Pyramid of Egypt on the dollar bill by a country that was evidently founded by Freemasons, you have to ask the question of what is important about that symbol.
I'd never thought about that, but now I'm asking that question. Now I'm starting to think about that. Okay, I want to get. I want to get into all the evidence. The evidence that the mainstream narrative is wrong on the pyramids, and I want to get into the evidence that of who the pyramids maybe potentially were built by. I don't know if we know exactly who they were. We don't know who they were built by, but certainly there's theories out there, right? So I want to get into the theories. I want to get into debunking the mainstream, but I want to first start out by asking you, at what point did you say, oh, the mainstream narrative, what caused you to be so curious about this topic?
I think it was just a association with the research topics that I've been engaged with for so long. I mean, it wasn't like I was focused on Egyptology and the pyramids from the get-go. I've had a pretty kind of wide array of fields of interest that I've dived in over the years, and I've spoken to a lot of people. I have my own podcast, so I've had a lot of guests on from different disciplines, different arenas. And I think just through association, through the alternative research community, you start to see little pieces of evidence, little things that make you go, I didn't know that about the Great Pyramid, or I had no idea that there were no mummies ever recovered. That's a very strong, point of contention for me. And little areas like that. So you start doing, and because of who I am, these things that are very strange, that are also the implications of them are very exciting. This fascinates me. I want to dive in. I want to know more. I want to pull on the thread. So that's where I just started to, incorporate Egypt and ancient prehistory in general into my research topics of interest. And, one of the things I would highlight as well is that it's certainly not just Egypt. Like, there is a global pattern of incredible megalithic stone building projects that we attribute to a Stone Age, a Neolithic age, this kind of age that when you hear Stone Age, you think primal, you think very rudimentary, barely even, cultured spears and deer hide tents, right? But apparently these people woke up one day and were able to construct multi-ton stone, precision-aligned megalithic buildings that are, tuned to the solstices and the equinoxes with exact clarity and are on cardinal north directions to magnitudes that would require satellite imagery, if we're being completely honest. When you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, it sits on exact meridian north, which really you need to be able to flatten the earth out into a square and be able to map it out to get the complete true alignment of north to the precision of accuracy that the Great Pyramid of Giza has it. So again, it's a global phenomena that I've been absolutely fascinated by. That's why I recently went to Malta, which has actually got the largest concentration of prehistoric sites in the world. It's only a small island, couple of islands, like an archipelago just off the coast of Sicily. And it's just this concentrated network of tunneled, complex temples and above ground megalithic temples, all attributed to lost people. We have no idea who built these. This is all before prehistory. It's all before history. This is prehistory, before written word, before we had any sort of idea what was going on. And yet, it's more advanced than many of the cultures that went forward from there. What does that say?
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some of the main points of contention that the mainstream narrative is wrong. So give us kind of a rundown of, like you already sort of did with the Sphinx and the water erosion around it. There's a variety of things that point to, okay, guys, and the lack of bodies in the tombs, in the so-called tombs, right? What are some of the other things that you could point at that are like, okay, this doesn't add up, and you people are just buying a narrative and you're going with it, but here's all the things that don't add up. Kind of give us a rundown of some of those things.
Well, I mean, another really good one is where some of these stones came from on the Giza Plateau that built the pyramids and, were used to construct the pyramids. First of all, we're talking multi-ton stones anyway, but many of them came from the Aswan Quarry, which is roughly 500 miles away from the Giza Plateau. And this is meant to have been done before the wheel was invented. So,
Right.
how did they get How did they get multi-ton stones 500 miles across rough terrain? It's not like we're talking roads here. We're talking rough terrain of the Egyptian deserts and the rising hills over to the Giza plateau. Like, that's another issue. They don't have a good explanation for this. And, you go to Aswan Quarry, which is a brilliant place to go because there's actually a half-finished obelisk, this gigantic one. It would have been, I believe it would have been either the second largest or the largest obelisk if it got completed, but it's got a crack running through it. Obviously something happened and it broke and they just left it, so it's half dug out of the quarry, this huge obelisk. But when you go to this quarry, the obelisk itself has these very strange scoop marks around it, all around it. The rock is smoothly scooped away, and a lot of Egyptologists, alternative Egyptologists, and even some mainstream ones have admitted begrudgingly that there's not really a good explanation for this. It almost looks like the stone has been scooped away with like it was made out of ice cream, like it was softened somehow. But we're talking rose quartz granite, an extremely tough form of stone. On the measurement of different type of like hardness of stone, I think it's like a 0.7 on the MOH scale. I can't remember what that stands for, but that's the grading of stone. And it's an extremely hard stone. And this is meant to be before, steel and iron. This is bronze, copper tools that they were supposed to have been using, which would easily bend and break when hitting this granite. In the Aswan Quarry, you also have tunnels, like these literal vertical tunnels. I can send you some images if you want to include it, because I put it on X recently. Just like, we all talk about this obelisk that's amazing, but what about these vertical shafts that are going down into the granite, like boreholes, like giant boring holes? Absolutely no explanation for them whatsoever. And I think, again, one of the points of contention to highlight in terms of what the mainstream says about this, when you go to the Aswan Quarry, if you ever go, you have to sit through a little educational video at the beginning. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life, Kim. You're sitting in this dark little room and this little television comes on and it tells you about the Aswan Quarry and how they mined these amazing obelisks out of the ground. And apparently what they did is they got these hard diorite stones and they hit them against the granite. So it was just them smashing stones against stones repeatedly over time that managed to get these incredible precision-engineered obelisks that are complete 90-degree angled and completely you've seen the Egyptian obelisks. Everyone's seen these Egyptian obelisks, these big spears pointing up into the sky. They apparently got mined out of the ground with stones, just smashing stones against stones. It's embarrassing when you go there and you try it yourself and you see how ridiculous it is that they even try and put that forward as a narrative. But yeah, so there are a lot of contentions, a lot of problems. One last thing I'd highlight is, again, there are many sites in Egypt that do contradict what the dynastic Egyptians were capable of achieving. So the Assyrian in Abydos, that's a region of Egypt called Abydos, very advanced site. It uses the same stone building techniques that we see in Sacsayhuaman in Peru. We see it in Newgrange in Ireland. We see it in Stonehenge. We see this methodology being deployed all over the world, but not by the dynastic Egyptians, by a prehistoric race. Each country that has these types of stone building techniques, it's always attributed to a lost race, to a lost civilization. I could rattle on for a while, so I will be quiet in a minute, but I will say one last thing because I think it kind of ties on to that, is this is another thing with the Western academia and Western historians and mainstream archaeology. So in Peru, you have this incredible site called Sacsayhuaman. And it is this multi-ton stone building project where you have these huge stones fitted together like jigsaw puzzle pieces. No mortar, no binding agent, just they fit together. You can't put a razor blade between them. It's one of the most incredible prehistoric sites in the world. Well, I say it's prehistoric, but the Western cultures, the Western historians will attribute this to the Incas, right? To the civilization of the Incas. But the indigenous stories that come from this area, from the very people that we attribute it to another race, attribute it to a lost civilization. They say that it was far older than their Inca civilization and that they found it and they built around it. And there's evidence that they did build around it and added some less advanced structural integrity to it. But again, it just speaks to the fact that essentially what happened here is Western historians went somewhere, said it was the Incas. The people who are now the ancestors of the Incas said it's not the Incas. and we teach our children it's the Incas. Tell me why that's logical. Why? What evidence do they have for this? So that's why we have serious problems with mainstream history, because we have assumptions that it's so methodically thought out. They've really done the work. But in all honesty, with these things that contradict the model, that's what's important. When it's something that's a thorn in the side, it doesn't matter if it's explainable. They'll do all the really good work. They'll do all the really good analysis. But when it's not explainable, they just go, oh, it must have been the Incas. Oh, it must have been the Egyptians. Oh, it must have been the ancient Greek. But they don't actually examine the evidence that contradicts that.
Yeah. So they're not willing to say, oh, it actually turns out that the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. Like they're not willing to actually have that moment of maybe we're just wrong. Maybe our whole fundamental thesis is completely wrong.
Through history. All of history, we've done the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so tell us, what do you think? Who do you think built the pyramids?
Honestly, it's the same answer as like who built Stonehenge and who built these other areas around the world that I'm fascinated by. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. We don't know, but it's not the Egyptians that we have been attributing it to, I don't think, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others as well. It's a potentially antediluvian, pre-flood, before global cataclysm era construct. And the thing is, the advancement that you see in the pyramids, it's almost like it's a time capsule of knowledge. I mean, people speak about, the hidden records of the pre-flood eras, these lost civilizations, hear about Atlantis and things like this. But when you actually look at what the pyramids represent, I mean, for example, just to rattle off a couple of examples, the mathematical equation of pi is represented in the dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Okay, so how's that possible? The Fibonacci sequence, these kind of like sacred geometries, fundamental mathematical concepts are encoded into the actual geometry of the pyramid, including the radius of the Earth. There is like the circumference of the Earth is encoded into it. This isn't hyperbole, I promise. I can't rattle off the exact data on it, but if you look this up, everyone listening, these are all absolutely true. If you take the mathematical parameters of the pyramid and you divide it by pi, you get pi, and you get the circumference of the planet. So there is incredibly advanced knowledge encoded into the actual architecture itself. And a lot of people would argue that this is actually some form of knowledge time capsule. And when you examine the global myth of a flood, and then you realize that there's actually global mythologies of cycles of destruction, cycles of rebirth on this planet. There's been many rises and falls of civilization according to a lot of ancient texts and ancient scripts, from India to Egypt. It doesn't matter. There's always stories about rises and falls of previous civilizations. And so there is an idea that these pyramids are in essence guide stones for humanity. When these cataclysms take place, these pyramids will survive. They will withstand the seismic vibration. They will withstand the floods. They're powerful enough to do so. And what's left is the knowledge encased in the actual stonework itself as something to be decoded and kind of reverse engineered. And when we do that, we find incredible science that should not be present and was not present in dynastic Egypt. So I would say that it is evidence of a lost civilization. And the last thing I'll finish up on with this is the story of Atlantis. A lot of people laugh that off. But if you know where we get the story of Atlantis, it's quite interesting. It comes from Plato, the great Greek philosopher, but it doesn't just come from Plato. It actually comes from his great ancestor. Oh my gosh, I always know his name and I've completely forgotten it. But his great-great-grandfather, Solon, he was a sacred sage of ancient Greece, and he was a lawmaker. He was a very well-respected individual in ancient Greece. He traveled to Egypt. He traveled to the ancient city of Sais. And it was there that he spoke with the priests of antiquity. He spoke with these priests of these temples. And in his books, he recorded these conversations. And he wanted to talk about history. And essentially, they laughed at him and said, "Oh, Solon, you Greek know nothing of history. There have been many rises and falls way before your time." They didn't say way before. I'm using my own modern vernacular here. It wasn't like, dude, like, trust me, Solon, it was way before your time. But seriously, they were saying, you don't know nothing. You're basically children. You have no idea. And this is where they gave him the story of Atlantis. He takes that back to Greece. That gets given down to Plato. Plato gives it to the world, and we ignore Plato and say it's just a metaphor, it's just an allegory, it's just a story. Even though he gave the dimensions in stadia, which is the measurement they used in ancient Greece, gave the dimensions in stadia, he gave the geographical location, he described it, he talked about what they represented. And so I think that there is some truth to it. There was a lost time, a lost chapter, a lost story, and I think that we're almost like the traumatized offspring of that time period. We're so the opposite of whatever was going on this planet before this happened. It's like that cataclysm sent us down a radically different path. It's so different that when we see all this amazing evidence from the past, we can't even recognize it for what it is. We can't recognize it as some form of technology or some sort of functional system. We just see it as a tourist attraction, and it speaks so much to our level of consciousness.
Okay. So that theory would be that there was some sort of an ancient civilization that was highly technologically advanced that somehow got wiped out.
Yeah, technologically advanced, but in a different medium, through a different type of avenue to us. It wasn't wires and cables and batteries and microchips and superconductors. It was using the planet as a technology. That's my opinion. And that might sound really strange until you dissect what the planet's made out of and realize that the materials that comprise our planet are energetic. Many of them have incredible properties, like they can produce electricity under stress through vibration, through acoustic vibration. They can repel or attract magnetic fields. So what's very interesting is so many of these highly advanced prehistoric sites are actually made out of these very geoenergetic materials. So rose quartz granite, that's a part of the Great Pyramids of Giza, limestone, a fantastic amplifier of acoustic resonance, and then they are built on focal points on the Earth. So again, the pyramid sits on true north, and if you don't understand that the planet has all of these energetic fields, this isn't like spiritual woo-woo. We know this. We know that the planet produces electromagnetic energy. There is a toroidal energetic field that's constantly flowing around our planet. And so there are focal points where electromagnetic energy will be concentrated. And so what if they were harnessing this? This is basically, in my opinion, like ancient Nikola Tesla technology. Nikola Tesla, the amazing, basically the inventor of the 21st century, who died penniless and destitute because he was too controversial and too incredible to be given his time in the light, but is now venerated as a genius of electrical physics. He was using the same ideas, and he was fascinated by the pyramids. He was convinced the pyramids represented what he was trying to do, tapping into the larger energetic fields that surround our planet and using that energy somehow. For some reason, he wanted to use it to create the world we live in today. And perhaps these people were using it for a similar function, but it's true that we don't find technology in the same sense that we see technology. But that's what I mean by saying we've gone so far away from whatever we were that we can't recognize that these materials are energetic. They're being built in precision geometry. They're being aligned to the solstice and the equinox. They're being constructed on energetic lines on the planet that are focused areas of electromagnetic force. All of this screams to me that they were using it energetically. What for? That's the real question. That's what really gets me going. What were they actually using it for?
What about the idea of extraterrestrial involvement?
Now we're getting in there.
Why else would the pyramids be sitting, like you said, you'd have to have a satellite to place them in certain spots exactly. I mean, that points towards the sky, right? And needing to be able to look down. I mean, that seems to point to extraterrestrial involvement in some way.
Well, and they're aligned to the Orion star belt. So that's another important point to understand. And the Sphinx was aligned, they believe, to the constellation of Leo. I mean we, the alternative media, the alternative historian aspect of it, the mainstream do not attribute it to Leo, but the alignment with the Orion star belt is something that happens again around the world, which is quite interesting. Orion pops up quite a lot, and if you look at the most ancient myths we have that come from places like Sumeria, Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh and things like this, you get the stories of the Anunnaki. These gods that came down from the sky and molded humanity out of the clay of the earth. And some of the translations kind of suggest that we were almost slaves, that we were almost a labor force that was created by gods that were using us for, mining and, all sorts of weird reasons. Who knows if that's true? But there is certainly a veneration to the stars and a knowledge of the stars that is very strange and very contradictory. And what's interesting with the pyramids is they were originally encased in this incredible limestone. That's all essentially gone now. It's been robbed and looted and broken over the years, but they were encased in perfect limestone that was completely polished. They would have glistened like diamonds in the desert. Like you wouldn't be able to look at them with your naked eye because of the brilliance that would have been flashing off of this highly polished limestone. And they're so huge, and they're aligned with the Orion star belt. They're essentially mimicking the stars. They're mimicking the Orion stars on the Earth. And it was actually the great sage of ancient Egypt, Hermes Trismegistus, who's like a kind of archetype, like a sacred sage archetype in ancient Egypt, that said that it was in Egypt that both the heavens and the earth were represented as one. That at this one time in Egypt, both the stars and the gods on earth were represented in one single entity. So whatever that really means, it seems to be indicating a very close connection to the stars. And just a quick aside, there's a very interesting tribe in Africa called the Dogon tribe. And they had knowledge, this has actually been proven, they had knowledge of the Sirius star system, including a dwarf star, I believe it was Sirius B. They described and had diagrams of Sirius B on rocks before Western astrologies found them. It was completely invisible to our technology until we developed more refined telescopes. And I think it was only in the 1970s or the 1960s that we definitively proved the existence of Sirius B. And yet the Dogon tribe, who actually have a mythos about a god coming from this star system and giving them knowledge that they originally came from this star system, and they knew about this before Western technology evolved. So, where do we go with that?
Yeah, there's so much that that I think verifies or plays into the fact that it could have been extraterrestrial. Just even religion in general, like even the evolution of religion. I mean, when you look at the ancient religions of the Romans and the Greeks, believing in all these gods, like who were these gods? Where did they come from? What made them believe that there was this basically a race of gods and they all had different traits or different. Wouldn't that could, what if it was these were extraterrestrial beings? These were the beings that came down and gave us all this tech, that came down and built the pyramids, right? And so of course us non-extraterrestrials would say, wow, they're like gods, and they came from the sky, the heavens, right? They came from the heavens and they're here and they're going to return, even the evolution into the monotheistic religions, it still is this, there's a God out there and we go to the heavens when we die and this God is coming back and is going to save us. I mean, that there's this whole notion of the God is coming back to save humanity from what and how, and what, I mean, all of this plays into potentially the stories, oral traditions of basically extraterrestrials.
Absolutely, and the intersections and correlations between ufology and theology are extremely strong. This is a whole mixed bag when you get into the UFO subject in relation to the spiritual implications, and it's the same argument from a lot of people in terms of like an angel versus demon type of paradigm. It's essentially the same archetype that's downloaded and put into a sci-fi modernized version. It's now the aliens, but if you've got someone like Tom DeLonge, the former lead singer of Blink-182, on for a talk, he would tell you that this is exactly what he believes in because he was once talking about that and, on the radio saying that people in the Pentagon, officials in the Pentagon, in the Department of Defense, and et cetera, when he was meeting these spooks and these spies, had said to him that the Greek gods are real. The Greek gods are extraterrestrials, and essentially they were a civilization that existed long before us, that was devastated by a cataclysm, and some of them left and hung out on a small outpost somewhere and interacted with humanity throughout time, and that's who the Greek gods, the pantheon of Greek gods are, and that's who many other gods who seeded influence of religion and spiritual beliefs into humanity have been. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, because I don't necessarily trust the Western intelligence community to educate me on things like UFOs, because they've been keeping it secret for about 75 years. So, it's not necessarily something that I would just take and run with, but the implications of this cosmic knowledge that shouldn't exist at time periods where it clearly did, objectively proven through the fact that these things are aligned to different star alignments and solstices, and the Orion star belt, and the Dogon tribe's knowledge of Sirius. There is implications here that suggest some form of interface with people with knowledge of the stars. And so, I don't throw that away. I don't consider that to be out of the question whatsoever.
Well, and especially since so much stuff lines up to that. I mean, when you do start talking about UFOs, for one, now the government is starting to admit, okay, yeah, there's UFOs. After all these decades of them being like, oh, you're just an insane person. These people are crazy. And now suddenly they're like, oh, okay, yeah, actually, there is some truth to all of this. You've got guys like Dr. Stephen Greer coming out saying, a lot of these UFOs that we're spotting are actually reverse technology. The U.S., government or private entity reverse technology, because of alien spacecraft, they were able to get some, reverse tech them. We have that tech. When you start looking at all of those aspects, and then just religion and how the narrative of religion, it makes sense that it would, talking about the heavens and descending from the skies. I mean, what else do you need to know? That sounds to me like could be extraterrestrial. I mean, all of this is adding up. And they talk about the nukes, like whenever they let off a nuke, like a test a nuke, then suddenly there's alien, like UFOs start popping up everywhere. Like, hey, what are these people doing? They're about to destroy themselves. It's very interesting how much this connects.
Yeah, flaming chariots in the skies, and in the ancient Sanskrit texts in India, you have the Vimanas, which are these gigantic flying fortresses that did battle in the skies, and references to things that sound like energy weapons. This is stuff that's and this is again it's seeded into mythology through the ancient texts, so it's disregarded as nothing other than symbol and metaphor and allegory. But maybe we need to be taking these myths a bit more seriously. Maybe we need to be looking at them and actually examining what they might implicate, and especially when you do actually have evidence outside of just the stories. You have the architecture, you have these incredible examples of something that doesn't match, it doesn't line up with what we're being told. So maybe there's something else in these stories that has some truth to it as well. So the interfacing with extraterrestrials, I think a lot of it is people don't want to take away from the ingenuity of humanity, and I would agree with that. I think that there is actually good evidence that we are responsible for some amazing, incredible things in prehistory, but the interfacing with non-human intelligence, this implication and idea that that's happened throughout time, I believe it. I do believe it. I think it's very strange in the year 2025 to ignore the possibility of life, not just in the universe, but we're now getting, knowledge and understanding through quantum mechanics that there could be other dimensions, other layers, other threads of reality that you can't even begin to perceive. And so to be so arrogant as to say that nothing could bleed through, nothing could influence, nothing could enter our space, I think it's kind of more about being a little bit of a head in the sand type of a person. And maybe it freaks you out to think that we're so exposed to so much intelligence out there. But I think that the universe and reality in general is likely brimming with intelligence. I think that's probably the point of reality itself.
Yeah, there's certainly there's so much. I think if anybody takes a class, to open up their minds in order for them to start really thinking about this. When I was in college, I studied philosophy, and one of the courses I took was space and time, and it was taught by a physics professor who also, I believe he was a double PhD in physics and his dad was actually, it was Professor Teller. I went to University of California, Davis, and his dad was Teller, the one that helped work on the atomic bomb. So he's part of that,
right,
Oppenheimer, the movie and stuff. So brilliant guy. And the class was mind blowing. I mean, just the science and the point of it was to take these philosophy students and to get them to understand this it's a real science, but it's just to understand the science. And something scientists don't really do is, okay, what are the implications of this? Like, now that we know this, what does that mean? And then the philosophy students were supposed to sit there and say, well, shit, like, what does this mean for us as humans? But the class itself was mind blowing. I mean, the physics of how, of perception of you think something's a certain length, or you think that there's an order to time, and there's just not.
Right.
Things can be manipulated, time can shift, space, time and space can shift. And it was just the most mind blowing. That was the one class I took that when I walked out of it, I realized I just wasted all these years in college. I know nothing. Like, I know nothing at all about anything. Why am I here? I know nothing.
Yeah.
And when you start to realize that you know nothing, that the science is so incredible, that there's so much more to just how the universe works, then these types of things like other dimensions and extraterrestrials become not only possible, but absolutely plausible. You sit there and say, well, of course, obviously, this is going on. How stupid are we to think it's not? I mean, absolutely it's going on. So all of these things, from religion to the pyramids pointing to the sky, to certain stars with precision, to the UFO stories and sightings, to the reverse tech potentially, to even the Masons and the symbolry, right? All of this points to other civilizations that potentially have influenced us or even created us, for all I know. I mean, that's what it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more you know, the more you realize how little you actually know. And then when you actually remove yourself from the curated path that's laid out for us through our educational system, through the academic journey into the professional world, if you stray from that path and you start to, realize that it's actually, that line that we're given, it's not very well drawn. It doesn't actually make much sense. It doesn't actually match up. And then when you do that, you get attacked quite ferociously. I mean, just look at Graham Hancock and how much he's had to withdraw in the mainstream media from all angles, calling him far-right, radical, racist, extremist, just for trying to highlight the indigenous stories. That's what's quite funny about it in a way, is he's actually being the reverse of that. He's trying to pay attention to the indigenous stories that say, actually, our culture says that this is way older and it's not actually ours. We don't attribute it to us. But then the Western world attributes it to them and then calls him racist for it's like, wait a minute, hang on a second, you're not making much sense here. So yeah, I think we're in such an interesting time, Kim, because it's not just history, it's social policy. Like, I'm a little bit on the reverse of you. I do all of this alternative history research and paranormal, but I'm very plugged into geopolitics, and I'm very interested in the culture wars and where that's all going. So that's a turbulent ocean of change and chaos, and people don't know what to think there. Then you've got history being essentially disintegrated through evidence that's starting to pop up, and then in physics and science and quantum mechanics is starting to contradict the very fabric of our reality and saying, well, this thing that you think is so solid is actually just made of fluctuating energy. It's essentially a hologram. So, where are we going to go next? We're on the threshold of artificial intelligence gaining something that we could call consciousness. We're producing superconductor quantum computers. Like, we're in a very fast-paced and ever-changing time, and the idea that you could hold on to these dinosaur outdated models in such a fast-paced time is a joke. And that's what it's starting to look like.
Yeah, I mean, it's looked like that, I think, with the pyramids for a long time, as far as them just ignoring all of this other. It's like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, you just explain it all away. And you're right. For what you said in the beginning, we've seen this time and time again with a variety of different subjects.
Yeah. People
just hold on to the mainstream. Let's talk about the implications of all of this. So let's say it's the aliens, there's extraterrestrial or from a different dimension or whatever, and they're the ones that have influenced the pyramid. They built the pyramids. Their UFO sightings are real. Religion is a farce. I wouldn't say it's a farce, but it's actually misunderstood. It would be, rather than this, what is a god, I guess? And the gods are actually these extraterrestrials, and they're coming back down to save us at some point. So if we look at the implications, this is where it gets interesting. And this is where some people theorize, well, the reason why the government wouldn't come out and just admit 70 years ago that there were UFOs, or however long ago, is because it would just shake the very fabric of society, because especially, as time gone on, people have become less religious. But a while, but churches have been very powerful. The Vatican has been very powerful. You've got them siphoning money out of people in the name of religion. A lot of stuff is going on in the name of religion, and that would lose its power if suddenly we found out that the aliens were real and that's where we came from, and that we didn't come from some, God or Jesus or any of these other things. The implications are pretty stark, I think. What do you think would happen? Let's say they finally admit it. We get we say, yep, okay, it's the aliens. I mean, what would happen to society?
I think most people wouldn't believe it. I think we're in a time with such distrust in institutions and such a kind of like distrust of social media and misinformation and fake news and AI generated content, that if the government's just kind of said that this is what's happening, I think most people wouldn't believe it. Most people would probably think they're being tricked. It's something else. It's a smokescreen. It's a distraction, bro. This is a red herring. That's how people feel these days. And so I actually don't think there would be some sort of incredible, shock to everyone's psychology. Like some people would be impacted. I think if the motherships turned up in the sky, if it was like, oh, they're literally back, that would be a little bit of a different situation, and I think people would really struggle with it. But when you talk about the reasons for keeping something like this secret, my God, is it multifaceted? Is it not so many different threads of potential problems? So you said about the essentially the industry of religion, right? And like how that might be threatened, how its foundations and principles might be threatened by the existence of influence that came from extraterrestrials. But then there's also an entire other side dedicated to the secret technology, right? So if there's a free energy paradigm, if there's what they call 0-point energy, tapping into that quantum vacuum, that kind of base foundation layer of reality where all this energy is bubbling up and can be used. If we can do things like that, well, that's a massive threat to the macro dollar oil gas system, isn't it? That's a huge threat to that economy. So you're actually looking at a multi-angled huge disruptor if these things turned out to be true. So it's actually, it's not surprising that they're covering it up. I'd be surprised if they weren't covering it up, because it's clearly going to do such damage to their system, not to our psychology so much. I think that's the lie we're fed. Oh, you can't handle the truth, that type of line that's fed to us. But I actually think it's more about the fact that they can't handle the change. They can't handle the shift that would take place. And in terms of influence, one last thing that's quite interesting. Did you know that the Great Pyramid of Giza is 8-sided? It's an 8-sided pyramid. Do you know that? Oh, it's 8-sided. It's got 8 sides to it. It looks like it's got 4,
right?
But there's actually 8. It's very light, and it only appears during certain times. You have to get a good aerial shot of it, but it's demonstrably an 8-sided pyramid. If you flatten that out, it's actually the Templar flag, which is the the Templar cross for the secret order. That's also a cross section. If you take a cross section of a photon, a fundamental particle of light, that is also a Templar cross. It's the same cross section that's flattened out from the pyramid. That's also being worn on the weird little wristwatch that you see on Gilgamesh from Sumeria. So the Anunnaki, all right, the original gods. So here you've got the original gods from the original stories wearing a symbol that then, when compressed, becomes the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Gosh.
And also is essentially a cross-section of a photon, which is a fundamental particle of light. So, there's a lot going on in symbology, and people disregard it far too quickly.
Yeah. And then it just, again, with the implications of all of this, I mean, if these secret societies are hiding information, hiding knowledge, so that they can empower and enrich themselves, while they essentially turn the rest of us into their plebes, their slaves. That's another implication there. I mean, you've got geopolitical implications on this as well. I mean, if countries realized, oh my gosh, they're kind of starting to do this, though, I think, with like Space Force. They're starting to kind of do this, like, oh, we got to start fighting wars in the skies. And maybe that's because they're realizing, oh, actually, the aliens are coming back, and maybe we escaped them the first time. Maybe we ran them out of here. I mean, maybe we were slaves and we ran them out of here. We said we don't want to be your slaves anymore, and we were able to keep some of the tech and some of the information, and they left us alone for a while. But they plan to come. I mean, who knows what their motivation is? I would hope that it's benevolent, but you can never be so certain. We're certainly not a benevolent people, and if we come from them in any way, shape, or form, then I think I think it's fair to assume they're not either, if they're like us in any way, right? The geopolitical would be, what if the world discovered, yes, there are aliens and maybe they're coming back? The world would have to unite together. It would be the greatest uniting force, and we would stop warring with one another, which is a huge money-making industry. And we'd have to start saying, oh, we have to band together because maybe the aliens are coming back. But then they're weaponizing that, and they're trying to make that into a big industry, and they'll still figure out a way to make money off of it. That's for sure. But the energy one, I think, is a big one. That the energy one is huge. I mean, so much money's been made off of energy. And if we all found out that energy is free and it's all around us and we could all tap into it at any time, that would be a giant change in the way the entire world is structured.
Yes, it would. And what's kind of interesting, and I'm not a massive fan of like either of the political sides of the aisle right now in America. I am a bit zoomed out of it, to be honest, and I feel the same about my own country. But what is quite interesting, I feel very much the same about my own country. Don't even get me started, please. I'll probably get arrested, as you probably know.
You would. You don't have free speech, so watch out.
I see them. There's a black helicopter hovering out there already right now, so I need to be careful what I say. No, but seriously, one of the interesting parts of history that just ties in the current administration with the Trump family is John G. Trump, who was an MIT professor and an electrical professor, engineer, very, very smart man. And he was the guy who was put in charge of assessing all of Nikola Tesla's work when he died. All of his secret work, all of his patents, all of his, schematics, they were given to John G. Trump to assess for the CIA and for, the defense agencies in terms of any actionable intelligence that could be drawn from, technical schematics. And he said that he had come across correspondence between Nikola Tesla and members of the British and Russian royal family about their interest in acquiring a super weapon that he had developed. And the CIA were very interested in getting John G. Trump to find any information he could on this super weapon. And there's a bit of archived video footage of him actually talking about this on an interview when he's an old man, just saying that he had some suspicions on how it worked, and it could work at a great distance, and it was extremely concerning that this was operable. And so what people need to understand is that Nikola Tesla, we're talking like over 100 years now, so Nikola Tesla died and the FBI swarmed in and stole everything. These guys took everything. So now we know that John G. Trump was put in charge of that. And the World Fairs, something that Trump has brought up a couple of times about bringing back the World Fairs, that's where Tesla demonstrated this technology, was at the World Fairs. So, I don't want to attribute any too much like kind of gravitas to it, but it is interesting that there's almost like a kind of family lineage back to Nikola Tesla from the guy that's currently running the American administration. And I just wonder if there's anything within that could indicate that there's a time period that's being pushed out now to bring this information into the forefront. And the UFO conversation being discussed in Congress and the Senate and within the intelligence agencies just makes me think that we are being in some way soft prepared for more innovations to be leaked out. But I would not rely on the government, on the president, or any official institution that represents like the intelligence military industrial complex to be transparent and truthful on this. They're going to, as you say, create their own narrative that benefits them, and maybe create that threat from outer space that will unite us all. As one of your presidents, who I'm forgetting the name of, I think it was Reagan. It was Reagan who said in the United Nations, I wonder what would happen to the world if it was faced with an alien threat from outside our planet, and how it would bring us all together. He said this at the UN. So there's a knowledge within the presidencies and within the government, and maybe we're seeing the slow roll of that now.
Yeah. Well,
it's interesting.
It's maybe why all the presidents seem to come from the same sort of secret societies and the same families.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
It's like, can we just break free from the same families and the secret societies and the hand picking of each and every single one of them? Yeah, right. But it's almost like it's planned because they have to come from certain thought groups, or certain groups and with knowledge.
That shouldn't be controversial either. I mean, like, we know that they come from these Skull and Bones and all these weird secret societies at Yale. It's like, okay, so they come from secret societies in school, and they join things like Bohemian Grove and the Bilderberg Group and World Economic Forum, and they're doing it here. And so why shouldn't we be suspicious of their agendas? It's just a very strange world where we've got this kind of like intense, adherence to institutional narratives that seems to have come out of like the last 5-6 years or so, maybe more. And I find that really weird and disturbing. And it seems to be very politicized in terms of like, well, my team supports the institutions, so I'm going to blindly support them, and my team is completely against them, so I don't trust anything. And it's like there's no middle ground anymore. Very frustrating.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're easily gaslit as people. We're easily manipulated. We're easily led very easily.
For sure.
Jay, this has been a fascinating conversation. Really, really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. Had a great time.
Thank you so much for being here. You do have a documentary coming out. Tell us about the documentary.
Yeah, so kind of in alignment with all of this prehistoric implications of advanced cultures and stone building cultures, there's an area of the world called Malta, and it's a small island just off the coast of Italy. It's one of the most concentrated, or in fact, it might be the most concentrated site of prehistoric stone building structures in the world. Incredible places, including one place called the Hypogeum of Halseflieni, which is actually the reason I went to Malta in the first place, because it's this multi-structured subterranean temple that they have completely definitively proven was architecturally designed to resonate at 110 hertz, which is actually the same hertz resonation acoustic wavelength that influences the brain into meditative, open, creative states. So this is a 5,000 year plus old multi-level subterranean site carved out of the limestone, meticulously engineered by a culture that we believe was Stone Age, to create acoustic resonance that allows you to transcend your consciousness essentially into meditative states. So that was the impetus behind going to Malta. But this place is full of just incredibly strange and, you know, very impressive stone building sites. So yeah, I went there, documented it all in 4K, and I'm now meticulously editing it all on my own, trying to get that done as soon as I can. But yeah, I would really appreciate it if people could support that. And, you know, hopefully I'll get that out in the next couple of months.
I can't believe you're going to be doing all that editing on your own. Where can people go to support it?
I know, right? Yeah, so I'm really bad at promoting myself, so I haven't got TikTok or Instagram or any of that, because it's just too much of a headache for me to put up with everything. And I am a one-man team, like it's literally just me doing everything. So I am on X, which you can find at The Project Unity, and I'm on YouTube at Project Unity. So pretty simple. Give me a subscribe, give me a follow, become a Patreon if you want to help me financially. That's always appreciated.
Yeah. Let's actually put that link down there. So we've got the links to your YouTube channel, your X, and your Patreon. So people can help out if they want to help with the editing of the documentary.
And you do get early access. You get early access, and you get access to our private Discord server if you become a Patreon. So I appreciate it.
Great. Well, this has been fantastic, Jay. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time and for this kind of deep dive primer into the pyramids and why the mystery is still such a mystery. There's a lot of implications. So.
There's a lot. You're welcome, Kim. I had a really good time, really enjoyed it. And if you ever want me back, I'd be happy to come back.
Would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Full Kim Iversen Show, which you can check out Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. The show airs live. It is a 1-hour live show Monday through Friday. Just head to KimIversonShow.com. See you there.